Will you pull out and keep handy page 5? I want to talk to you today about this reading from Acts. She was not a priest. She was not a deacon. She was not a bishop. She was not a prophet. What she was a disciple. Luke goes to great pains to tell us this. Luke writes, of course, the Gospel of Luke, and this second companion piece, the book of Acts, which tells us what happened after Christ was resurrected and ascended, right? The story of the early church. And Luke writes it, and he writes this part about Tabitha, and he tells us that she was a disciple. And what's so interesting about that is it's the only place in all of the New Testament where this feminine form of the word, the Greek word for disciple, is used. So clearly, Luke wanted to make a point. She was a disciple. And then he tells us something else. He says she has two names. First name is a beautiful name, Tabitha. Yeah. Anybody know any Tabithas? It's a gorgeous name, right? In Aramaic, the language of her people, her community, was Aramaic, and they called her Tabitha. But the wider area, the region, was Greek, and she had another name. It was Dorcas. An unfortunate name, don't you think? I mean, seriously. I mean, really. It's like, we can't really have this story. Why don't they just leave that part out? It would be easier, really, I think. But what's so interesting about it is she's known to her community as Tabitha in Aramaic, but she's also known to the wider community. Now, why did her community know her? It says, it's verse 36. These aren't titled or numbered, but it says the second line is, their community knew her and loved her because she was devoted to good works and acts of charity. Right? The wider church knew her because out in the community, that's what she did. They knew her as Dorcas, the woman who was Aramaic, spoke Aramaic, but did good works of charity. It'd be like if someone here were known in Omaha for their benevolence, right? Known in the wider community. Why did her church know her? Why did her parish love her? Her group love her? That's a little farther down. That's about halfway down. After Peter comes and they go upstairs, it says, all the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing their tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. She provided for the community. No doubt she was one of the wealthy widows who provided for their community. She was one, but not only did she provide for them financially, she made things for them. Right? Isn't it a touching, sort of a loving thing to know about somebody? She made their clothes. She handed them out. She was beloved. And she was their disciple, and they loved her. And like so many disciples across the ages and around the world, probably an unassuming person. I mean, probably somebody who didn't get a lot of recognition, right? I mean, there's no St. Dorcas Day, is there? That I'm aware of, right? I Googled this. There are St. Dorcas churches, but there aren't very many of them. None of them are Episcopal. Near as I can tell, there's a Baptist church called St. Dorcas somewhere down in North Carolina. There aren't even very many St. Tabithas. Unassuming, don't you think? Like millions of beloved but unassuming servants. People who do all the work but don't get the credit. That's the thing, right? Every church has them. We have them. When I first got here, a woman introduced herself to me this way. She said, I'm the church mouse. And I said, I wonder what that means, a church mouse. What is that? But it wasn't long, a couple of weeks before I figured out what it meant. What it meant was she was the one who came in when no one else was here, and she did the dishes and put them in the dishwasher. And she'd come back later in the day and she'd take them out of the dishwasher and put them away. And she'd take the little key, maybe you don't even know there is a key, but there's a little key to the towel thing that's in the bathrooms. She'd get that. She'd replace the towels. And she'd replace the toilet paper. I never even knew where toilet paper got changed. I didn't know how you did it really at home. But now I find out somebody actually has to do it. And it was a joke, right? Anyway. Have you noticed that those things aren't nearly as well taken care of as they used to be? All you have to do is come in on Monday and look in the men's bathroom. Y'all are slobs, by the way. This thing that's sitting there, that's a garbage thing. You're supposed to put the towels in there, okay, instead of the floor. That's not the garbage. point is, our church mouse is sick, and she's wrestling with a difficult diagnosis. And you just miss these disciples when they're not around. That's the thing. You don't even know they're here, but you miss them when they're not here. We lost another disciple this week. She didn't die. She isn't sick. She moved. She used to sit right here. Marjorie. Yeah? And she, like Tabitha, would weave, right? And make things. And she moved because she needed to be in an assisted living place, and the one that she was able to get in was down in North Omaha. And she just doesn't drive, so she won't be back here. And I'm telling you, we're going to miss her because that's not the only thing she did. She would greet. If you came on a Sunday and there was no greet, we usually assign greeters, but if the greeter wasn't here, she would just stand up and do it. You didn't have to ask her, and she didn't want any credit for it. She just did it, right? Disciple. Yeah, going to miss her. They're hard to replace. We lost another one this week to death, actually, Father Jim. Sadly, Father Jim died this week. He used to sit right here. And after a long illness, you wouldn't have known he was sick, really. He never complained, to my knowledge. He was always just full of love and joy. And so at the end there, a lot of us went out and we prayed with him. And Bishop came out, like Peter going to see Tabitha. The church hierarchy came. And, unfortunately, he wasn't raised from the dead, but he was raised to spiritual life, right, with God. But, gee, I'm going to miss him. He was a great friend and a great disciple. Well, why this story about Tabitha? It's not so that we can, walk around raising people from the dead. That really is not what we do these days. Peter was able to do it. The story, what it tells us is it's a promise to Peter that he can continue in the works that Christ had told him about. Really, this whole story is about two things, really. It's about the continuation of the promise of the gift of the Holy Spirit. So Jesus tells the disciples, listen, I'm going to go, but I'm going to send you a comforter. So just hang out, the comforter will come. And Pentecost, it happens. And they receive great power. And the disciples go around and they do the works, because that's what Christ said they would do. He said, you too will do these same works as I've done. You will raise people from the dead. They'll come up off their sick bed. You'll heal them. You will do all these mighty works. And so this is a fulfillment of that promise of the signs and works that Jesus said they would have. Why? Further proof that he's the Messiah. Why? It says in the text. It says, this became known, her raising from the dead, throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. So all of it was so that the church could go from being a handful of scared disciples to what it is now, 2.5 billion people around the world. It all starts with these people right after Pentecost, given the power of the Holy Spirit. That's the whole story about Peter and Tabitha raised from the dead. But to me, what was so interesting this week was not so much that. It was the way that God shines God's, favor and goodness on those least assuming among us. The disciples who do all the work but get none of the credit. Those people that do everything. God has a special place for these folks. God has a special love for the disadvantaged. Right? We all know that. But what about those disciples? Not the people who stand up here and wear the $200 thing and have this and get all the credit. Oh, nice sermon, Father. Way to go. Good job. You're doing great. Not that. Right? It's the people that come in and change out the toilet paper and do the dishes and vacuum and knit things. So for me this week, it put me in mind of Sally, who's struggling and who's going through her last round of chemo, and she looks pretty good. I was over there to see her this week, and you know what? She was kind of just sitting there. We were talking, and should have seen her eyes when I told her that the bathrooms were dirty. And it wasn't like, oh, you guys miss me now. You see how much I work. No, it was like, I can't wait to get back there and do my job. That's what it was. Her eyes lit up because that's who she is. That's what she does. It put me in mind of Marjorie, who literally takes wool and weaves it into yarn and scoots that yarn through the loom and makes. She made me a lap blanket that every time when I'm sitting down in the winter and I'm watching television, I put it over my legs and I think of Marjorie. Right? And I think of the many shawls that she's made and given out here. And I think of the way that she served. Right? It put me in mind of Jim, who was a lifelong servant of the church, who you wouldn't know this unless you knew him, but is really a beloved and well-known figure in the Episcopal Church. He wrote the definitive book about the role of deacons called A Full and Equal Order that is used today around the country to tell people what it's like and to be a deacon. You wouldn't know it, you know. And so what I took away this week and what I'd like to just leave you with is remember the disciples among us. Remember those who work, who don't want the credit, right? And say thank you to them, right? Remember the disciples in your lives, the ones in this church even. And find them out, find them and thank them. But I'll tell you what, it's hard to find them because they're not around every day when you're here. You kind of have to seek them out. You don't really know who they are. But it's important that we remember them while we have them because once they're gone, they're hard to replace. Sally, by the way, will be back. Don't get me wrong. She'd be mad if I didn't say that.